From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Thanks for tuning in. Well, right in tune with the oppressive heat that's settling into Kansas and the Central Plains, we've K-State's A.J. Tarpoff in today to cover the measures that you cattle producers can take to abate the heat stress on your stock during extended stretches of excessively hot weather. We'll take a look at several items: water requirements, feeding adjustments, and methods of cooling cattle pens among them. He'll also refer you to a very useful online tool from K-State that posts and forecasts stressful livestock heat conditions. AJ's in next. And later on then, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with this week's Stop, Look, and Listen. Plus more here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks for tuning in. This is the Wednesday edition of Agriculture Today. Well, our weather has turned more toward what we are accustomed to here in the summertime here in Kansas. It is hot outside, and over these next few days, promising to be even hotter. Naturally, we get into the topic at this time of heat stress on our livestock, and particularly today on our cattle, and how you can counter that as producers. We've invited by today for a visit A.J. Tarpoff, beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension. And we go through this every summer, A.J., but interesting this year, it's been relatively cool by normal summer standards in Kansas up to this point. But really, starting today, the heat truly kicks in a severe way, and maybe our animals aren't accustomed to that yet.
No. So this is the first big heat spell that we've had so far this year, which it doesn't seem like too terribly long ago. We were discussing the cold, the wind, all the different issues that we had with the mud and going through this past winter. But yes, we're coming into heat stress time, and heat stress, is it a big deal? Yes. Every year it's estimated that our livestock industry, our beef livestock industry, loses about $369 million a year just due to the effects of heat stress.
What factors develop heat stress in cattle? It's worth reviewing those, AJ.
It is. So it's not just the relative temperature in an area. Okay, so we need to keep in mind that it's the ambient temperature. Okay, so we see that on the thermometer. We have the temperatures get above 97, 100 degrees. But what also plays a key role is relative humidity. We have that higher moisture level mixed in with higher ambient temperatures. But what about wind? We've all been outside on a nice breezy day that it seems, even though it's relatively hot, we get a nice breeze and it cools us down. The last that we don't talk about commonly is actually the UV radiation, okay? The solar radiation that beats down on either us, our animals, our livestock, that really increases the overall thermal load that these animals are exposed to on a daily basis. So those are kind of the 4 big factors that go into accumulating heat within our cattle. Okay, but let's talk about the cattle themselves, right? Do we have certain at-risk classes of animals that are more at risk to have heat stress episodes?
Dark-hided cattle for sure.
Think about your black car that you go out and sit on leather seats, right in the middle of the summer. Dark paint on a car is very similar to having dark hides on cattle. They will absorb more of that solar radiation. So yes, dark-hided animals are more at risk. But what about the size of that animal? Think about our animals that are on feed. Okay, so we have a great performing black feedlot steer that is out in a feedlot pen doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. He's got good body condition and fat cover over his back. He's more at risk. Okay, that's an enormous amount of energy expenditure that he needs to undertake just to cool down.
To know what you as a producer can do to help abate that heat stress, you need to also understand how cattle themselves adjust and what behavior they take on to in essence, try to cool themselves.
Right. So I think most of our producers, we can all understand and visualize what those heat-stressed animals do in the heat of the day. When is the heat of the day? Well, the heat of the day is afternoon. Okay, so it's 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These cattle, their internal temperature is about a 2-hour lag delay. Okay, so if the hottest part of the day is 3 p.m., that animal's internal temperature will be hottest about 5. Okay, so we do have a 2-hour delay. Now, what are they doing to cool themselves? Well, number one, evaporative cooling. They pant. They increase respiratory rate, which we can visualize. We can see them panting. We can see them open mouth breathing. Those are 2 key ways that they end up breathing heavily to help dissipate some of that heat load. Now, cattle, believe it or not, do sweat, but it's not very efficient. Compared to people, cattle sweat about only 10% of what a human has the capacity to be able to sweat. So sweating is not a very good evaporative cooling for cattle. They heavily rely on breathing out a lot of that heat load.
But there are obvious limitations to how much they can ease the heat load through those mechanisms.
There is. So what ends up happening is they will accumulate a heat load throughout the sun, the heat of the day. They will accumulate all this heat load, and they wait for the cooling that comes at night. We really run into big issues when we don't get that thermal cooling at night. And we call this cumulative heat load, okay, where cattle will absorb heat. They don't cool at night. They don't start fresh in the morning. Okay, they're already stressed, and they already have a higher cumulative heat load starting first thing in the morning, and they just keep accumulating more and more heat. So nighttime cooling is very, very important to get our cattle down to a thermoneutral, back to their comfort range.
But the unfortunate situation is, and we'll see it the next several evenings, if those nighttime temperatures stay in the mid to upper 70s for lows, that cooling does not occur.
And very true. And that's where we need to have a plan together that we need to implement, where we can watch the weather, we can watch some of our graphs, understand where these animals are not going to be cooling at night. That's kind of our danger zone. Okay, that's where if we have a plan in place, we wait for some of these things to come to fruition, weather-wise, and then we can implement that plan before it causes any undue stress on our animals.
Well, AJ, right here we will go through several options for providing heat relief to cattle. Before we do that, and we will remind also toward the end of our conversation about this as well, the Mesonet service out of K-State has put together an excellent tool for producers in assessing that heat level in their cattle herds.
They sure do, and it's called the Cattle Comfort Index, which I really like this tool, that it does kind of take into incorporation temperature, humidity, wind speed, but also the solar radiation that we deal with from the hot summer suns. It takes all of these into an index and actually tells you right off at this point in time today, do we have severe heat stress? Do we have no heat stress? But there's also a nice little tab that shows you the 7-day heat stress event. So you can see if we do get nighttime cooling or not. So you kind of understand what your risk level is in any given day of the year.
And that tool is operated on a running basis, so it's constantly updated. It's at mesonet.ksu.edu. Now to heat abatement itself, first and foremost, cattle have to have access to good quality drinking water constantly.
Water and lots of water. Okay, so water is one of the most essential nutrients of animals. Whenever we have a heat stress event, guess what? That is the most essential nutrient times 5. Okay, right. And I say times 5 because the question always comes up, how much water do these cattle need? And a good rule of thumb I like to work off of is whatever they're consuming, dry matter intake, they need 5 times that in water. So, rough estimates, if an animal's consuming a little over 30 pounds of dry matter of feed, well, whenever we put that on a pound basis and we know how many pounds are in a gallon, we're pushing 20 gallons per head per day. Now, what does that tell us? As the stewards of these animals, we need to make sure that they have ready access and plenty of it. Good quality, good quantity. So quantity, if we have a group of animals, whether this is a feedlot pen, whether this is a well, do we have enough well capacity for, grazing animals to keep up? So if we know how much they need per day, we need to make sure that the lines are pressurized like they should, so they refill like they should, so these animals are never short of that essential nutrient. So that's the biggest thing. Other things with water, okay, we know how much they need. What about availability? Okay, many times we have one water trough. In very stressful conditions of severe heat stress, increasing our water tank capacity and availability will really help make sure that every animal within that group consumes the proper amount of water.
In essence, bunk space.
Bunk space, but water space. Right. So if you do have cattle in a feedlot and if you have empty pens, cattle that are getting ready to go to hit that final weight, if you have fat pens that are almost ready to go and you have empty pen space around, split those pens. Okay, we can split those pens. We can double the water capacity for that group of animals. There are other operations that may not have that availability. We can actually put out some water tanks within the pens themselves, come by with the water hose on a fire truck and be able to fill those up. I've known a couple of operations that will actually use sandbags and dam off a certain area of the feed bunk and actually fill that with water just to increase that availability for these animals during these hot summer heat stress episodes.
Now, for producers with cattle out on grass, farm ponds are the usual water resource of choice, but even then, a producer needs to be aware of the quality of that water available, do they not?
It does. So, unfortunately, with farm ponds, what happens to the surface of that pond? It starts to get hot.
Right.
Okay. It really starts to increase in temperature with that hot summer sun and the temperatures that come with it. So, is it the best for heat stress events? No, it's not. Unfortunately, we will see cattle standing in these ponds for long periods of time. What do they do whenever they're standing around? Well, they also urinate, defecate, things of that nature, that we can impact the water quality, which will reduce intake. And ultimately, we're trying to increase water intake at the same time. There are some situations that we may have to deliver extra water out to pasture settings. So having that kind of prep work in place, that if we do need to deliver extra water for some of these grazing animals, we have the availability with some tanks that we know where we can fill them, and we're prepared to start delivery of some of that water source whenever that time comes.
Well, we're talking heat abatement for cattle in the summer stress that we anticipate will be around the next few days with K-State's A.J. Tarpoff, and we'll return with more on this topic from A.J. in a moment on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Agriculture Today continues now as we're talking once more with K-State beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff. He's along for a timely look at what to do about the excessive heat that we see settling into Kansas now and providing comfort from that heat for your beef cattle. A.J., here's one tactic that's really been played up in recent years. It seems to have considerable merit, and that is taking another look at how one is providing that supplemental feed to cattle, not only in terms of what they're feeding, but when, correct?
Correct. So whenever we feed an animal, we talked about how animals accumulate heat, okay, through the relative, the temperature, relative humidity, solar radiation, wind speed, and if they're dissipating or not. But what about the heat that the animal produces? And this is where it's a little bit different. It's called, it's the heat of digestion, okay? They ferment all these feeds. That actually releases heat. Whenever we feed an animal, it takes time for digestion to occur, but they will have a peak digestive heat load about 4 to 6 hours later. Okay, so understanding that, do we want to feed cattle where they're going to match their digestive heat with the hottest parts of the day? And
probably not.
No. So things that we can, being proactive, having that basic understanding, and then what feeds actually create the most heat. We always, in the cattle industry, we talk about hot rations, okay, higher starch rations. Believe it or not, they're not the highest heat producing. They just have the most energy dense. Actually, the lower quality straw hay, very poor quality grass hay, things of that nature that are very fibrous, actually produce the most heat in those animals inside the rumen. So typical feedlot rations, grazing animals on lush green grass, those have a much lower overall digestive heat load compared to some of our other rations. So that's a good thing, understanding that. But it's still good recommendations that we may come into a heat stress event that will back cattle off of certain rations and certain energy levels. And it's not drastic, but we may back them off 5 to 7% on an energy basis just to make sure that they will still consume what they need, but we don't run into some digestive issues later down the road, and they don't have quite the digestive thermal load from those rations they consume.
And again, you want to provide the ration in the cooler part of the evening. That will be your best bet.
It's a good recommendation that whatever you feed for the day, we want to feed 70% of that as late as possible into the evening. So that means nowadays, this time of year, we may be providing that ration 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, which some of our feed delivery folks aren't thrilled about always, but we really push back that digestive heat load until the cooling hours of the night. Okay, and that can really make a big impact on how much these animals deal with during the heat of the day.
Well, AJ, for cattle in confinement now, providing some sort of ambient water, if you will, sprinkler systems, direct applications will provide cooling if it's done properly, correct?
If it's done properly. So sprinkler systems. Our number one reason why we have sprinkler systems in our feedlots is, number one, dust control. Number two, cooling of the pen floor, not of the cattle directly. So whenever we use sprinkler systems, we want to make sure that they have big droplet size. We don't want a mist, but we're trying to apply water to actually cool the surface of the pen, but not directly cool the animals. Indirectly, we will cool those animals once we decrease that temperature of the pen floor. Keep in mind the pen floors can get up over 140 degrees during the heat of the day. And whether that's just straight dirt or a small amount of manure on that pen floor, it can get to some pretty extreme temperatures. So if we use sprinklers, they're used either overnight or in the very early hours of the morning to make sure that all of that gets wet. It does have a chance to dry out, so we don't artificially increase the humidity on that pen floor. Now, since we're talking about the pen floor, one thing that you can do during these days of extreme heat, the pen floor may be 137, 140 degrees during the heat of the day. Just applying a small amount of straw bedding to the pen floor can decrease that pen floor temperature by about 25 degrees. Okay, so that's another tool to have in your back pocket that when we get in some of these events, that may be something to help cool the ambient area around these animals.
And that may sound impractical to some producers, but that is worth the trouble, providing that bedding when you have severe conditions like we may well have in the coming days.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to help reduce the overall accumulating heat load in these animals and increase the likelihood of nighttime cooling.
Well, one obvious thing would be, if one, again, can sensibly provide it, is shade. Shade is a phenomenal tool to have at our disposal. The folks in the cattle industry a little bit further south from here, from Kansas, the feedlots down in Arizona, parts of Texas that have routinely dealt with heat stress events for years and years and years, they're much more likely to have different shade structures up and at their disposal. There's quite an array of products out there.
There are quite an array, whether it's a pasture setting or whether it's in a feedlot. It doesn't have to be anything special. The one thing I want to bring up, if you're considering shade as a heat stress abatement, we need to make sure that we have plenty of it. Okay, so what's recommended is about 20 square feet per head. So 20 square feet, if you picture that on the ground, okay, a 4x5. Okay, a 4x5 area is enough for every animal within that pen. What happens if we don't have enough of shade space within a given area, all the animals will coop up and they'll try to get under that shade, and then they increase their own temperatures by spreading body heat between each other.
They'll just aggravate the problem.
Correct. Now, I do want to throw out a hint of warning, especially for a lot of our cow-calf operations and pasture-based operations. We just came off a very cold winter. Okay, we may have had some windbreak structures or these small sheds, these loafing sheds that we provided for animals to be able to lay in to get out of the elements. This time of year, those can be just almost a death trap. There's no airflow. They have very little just airflow, ventilation, and cattle will still try to use those to get out of the heat of the solar radiation, but it can be dangerous heat levels on the inside of those. If you do have those out within your pasture settings, if there's a way that you can actually get those off the ground so we can get airflow and ventilation to go through them. But personally, I try to get those out of the pasture if I can during these times of extreme heat, just because I know there's not enough airflow going through them. Most of our feedlots use fabric and different types of shade structures that are actually elevated upwards to 20 feet, of course, so you can still drive a loader underneath them. But that provides plenty of ample airflow to try to cool these animals down where they can get out of the sun, decrease that radiation, and try to get a little bit of a breeze. The other thing that you can do that I didn't bring up earlier is for our feedlots is make sure that we have properly made mounds. Dirt ground mounds in the center of the pen, cattle will climb to the top of these and actually catch small amounts of breezes that'll help cool them down during these episodes.
Airflow is vital among many other things that we're talking about here. And it would seem to go without saying, but the producers should minimize any and all handling of the animals in these conditions when possible.
If coming over the next several days where we're going to have extremely high temperatures, this is the danger zone, okay? Extreme danger zone that we don't want to be working cattle. If you do need to process, reimplant, gather animals, do anything like that, make sure that we try to either get that done as early as possible in the morning to make sure that we are done, those animals are resting by 10 a.m. That should be the ultimate goal. Or as late as possible in the evening. During the heat of the day, we want to leave those animals alone, let them rest, relax, and try to cool themselves down, and let's hope for some nighttime cooling coming up over the next couple days to keep these animals in their comfort zone.
Very good. And as a parting thought, remind us once again about that tool on the Mesonet website and how useful that can be.
Kansas Mesonet, it is the Cattle Comfort Index, phenomenal tool to keep in your back pocket to monitor when we're coming into some of these dangerous times during the year. How many days in a row have we had cumulative heat stress and cumulative heat load where these animals may be at increased risk? Okay, so I think it's a phenomenal tool that we have at our disposal, and I'd like producers to take every opportunity to use it.
That is an excellent device to use in making these decisions on abating heat stress in your cattle herd. mesonet.ksu.edu. Producers, check that out for sure. And AJ, we appreciate you coming over, sharing all of this advice on what producers can practically do to help their cattle through these stressful next several days and probably beyond, as we've plenty of summer left.
Pleasure to be here, and stay cool.
Indeed. AJ Tarpoff, beef veterinarian, K-State Research and Extension with us. While we have the opportunity, might slip in here a quick word that the dates have been set for the first two K-State Kansas Livestock Association Ranch Management Field Days in the 2019 series. Hosting the first event, state-of-the-art commercial milking operation, High Plains Ponderosa Dairy. That's set for Tuesday, August the 13th in southwest Kansas near Plains. And in Lyon County, Moyer Farms, LLC, Jared and Shauna Moyer will be hosting the second field day that following Thursday, August the 15th at their operation just north of Emporia. Each of these field days will include presentations on the history of the host operations and practices used at each today, as well as educational sessions and the complimentary beef dinner. Go to KLA.org for updated information on the K-State KLA Ranch Management Field Days coming up in August. We'll be back with more after this break. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. With the states of Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico reporting now multiple confirmed cases of vesicular stomatitis virus, the Kansas Department of Agriculture is encouraging you livestock owners to be aware and take precautions, particularly with animals that may be commingling with others at competitions and similar events. At this time, there have been no cases of VSV reported in Kansas, to stress. This is a viral disease which primarily affects horses. It can also affect cattle, sheep, goats, swine, llamas, alpacas. The disease characterized by fever and the formation of blister-like lesions in the mouth and on the dental pad, tongue, lips, nostrils, ears, hooves, other parts of the livestock. Infected animals may refuse to eat and drink, which could lead to weight loss. There are no USDA-approved vaccines for VSV. Now, that virus is primarily transmitted from biting insects, black flies, sandflies, midges. Owners should consider treatments to reduce insects where animals are housed. And VSV can also be spread by nose-to-nose contact between livestock. The virus itself usually runs its course, says the department, in 5 to 7 days. It can take up to an additional 7 days for the infected animal to recover from the symptoms. Any premises with animals diagnosed with VSV are quarantined until at least 14 days after the last affected animal is diagnosed. This is considered a reportable disease in Kansas. Any person who suspects their animals may have vesicular stomatitis virus should contact their local veterinarian or state animal health official right away. On the agricultural trade fronts, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer will hold another call with China trade negotiators this week. Quoting Mnuchin, "We expect to have another principal-level call this week, and to the extent we make significant progress, I think there's a good chance we will go there later," said Mnuchin. Commenting on the China situation, President Trump indicated his relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping has changed. Quoting the president, "I used to say he's a good friend of mine, probably not quite as close now." The president told that to reporters earlier this week at the White House. He went on to say that he has to be for our country, as he put it. He is for China, I am for the USA, and that is the way it's got to be, again in President Trump's words. Meantime, representatives from a cross-section of livestock industries told members of a House Agriculture Subcommittee yesterday that their livelihoods depend on federal efforts to expand trade. The president of the National Pork Producers Council, David Herring, told lawmakers during a hearing yesterday before the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture that the recent trade disputes with China and other nations have hurt the pork industry. He went on to say that China is the largest producer, consumer, and importer of pork in the world, but at a 62% tariff rate, U.S. pork producers, he said, are losing $8 per animal or $1 billion on an annualized industry-wide basis because of the punitive tariffs it faces. Herring added there is an unprecedented sales opportunity for U.S. pork producers in China as it continues to battle the spread of African swine fever and experiences a major reduction in domestic production. Were it not for the retaliatory duties on U.S. pork, says Herring, we would be in an ideal position to meet China's need for increased pork imports and single-handedly put a huge dent in the U.S. trade imbalance with China. And Herring added that pork producers are eager to see ratification of the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement as well, because it preserves zero-tariff pork trade in North America. House Agriculture Committee ranking member Michael Conaway of Texas said that the livestock and poultry industries need the USMCA. He is urging his colleagues across the aisle to join him in committing to work together to approve that agreement. In the meantime, Trade Representative Lighthizer is struggling to overcome resistance to ratifying the USMCA deal struck by the president last year. Democrats, who took control of the House this year, are asking for stricter enforcement provisions, especially for new labor rules aimed at Mexico and stronger environmental protections. Lawmakers say that while Lighthizer has listened to their concerns, They say he needs to start taking concrete steps to reopen negotiations with Mexico and Canada. That deal struck last year to replace NAFTA requires ratification, of course, by legislators in all three countries before it can take effect. Mexico ratified the agreement last month, and it is expected to pass easily in Canada. Now, the president has resisted making changes and has threatened to withdraw from NAFTA or impose tariffs on U.S. neighbors if Congress doesn't pass this new agreement. Lighthizer, who's been leading the effort to cut a trade deal with China, has recently shifted more of his attention to the USMCA. He has trekked to Capitol Hill at least weekly to meet with House Democrats. He has also met repeatedly with the Ways and Means Committee, as well as the centrist Democrat groups known as the Blue Dogs and the New Democrat Coalition, both of which support reworking NAFTA. He's also met with the Progressive Caucus as well as the Hispanic Caucus, those groups that have ardently opposed policies in the Trump administration. The White House formally notified Congress last month it's starting the approval process for the trade agreement and could at any time submit the agreement to Congress, though chief White House economic officials have said that they are waiting on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi, who has a monthly meeting now with Lighthizer, as well as regular phone calls, according to an aide, has said the deal may need to be reopened with surgical precision to accommodate Democrat requests. The Labor Department has announced plans to modernize a long-time guest worker agricultural labor program with reaction to the news from the USDA Secretary. More from the USDA's Rod Bain.
Long talked about reform to our nation's H-2A guest worker agricultural labor program. On Monday, the Department of Labor announced proposed rules to modernize H-2A, such as streamlining and simplifying the application process, as well as various regulations within the H-2A program. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue in California, when the proposed H-2A modernization was announced, had this to say.
We've been working with the Department of Labor for over a year now and trying to help the H-2A program become more workable. Actually, it's been very onerous, very inflexible, and very difficult for these growers to comply with all the rules and regulations. You had to tell them exactly what day a worker was going to be needed. Fruit may be ready 2 weeks early or 2 weeks late, and you're left with people either not having work to do or hanging around waiting for something to happen.
The Secretary adds that USDA's Farmers.gov web portal will have H-2A applications available to growers, with one filled application sent to both the Departments of Labor and Homeland Security. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Today's agricultural news headlines. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It's funny. When walking the farm this last Saturday, the creek flow was a small flow of clear water through which you could see the rocks.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
This past Saturday, they continued to cut hay. It was good brome. The first field, cut earlier, made 3 tons to the acre. After cutting and baling that field, they stopped. Rain was coming again. I'm so glad that the field was baled in time. Now, with the hay down, I can walk the farm and check the fields and other crossings. As we would have said down under, it is a bloody mess. McIntyre Creek runs diagonally through the farm, and with the heavy rains, whole trees have been undercut by the flowing water, and they lean over or have tumbled into the creek. They flow down and cause blockages in places, and by doing so, dam off the water flow. The creek level rises and pushes debris onto the adjacent fields. There was a lot of timber laying, branches, both big and small. It was a mess. but the hay is good. At one corner in the creek where an old tree leans over, branches and tree stumps have stacked up to 6 feet high. But in one field, the flooding water pushed timber up across the field, up against the trees along the edge of the field. A fantastic place for snakes and pack rats. Without a tractor with a grasping bucket, I don't see how I will ever clean that up. If I light it, it will burn for a week or longer. And even if I clean it up, the trouble is there's much more where this comes from. McIntyre Creek has trees along its shoreline, and they're falling into the creek. They have for years, but the recent heavy rains have hastened the problem, and with the rising water, the trees float down. It's funny. When walking the farm this last Saturday, the creek flow was a small flow of clear water through which you could see the rocks. A big leap or step, and I was across. That same creek roared a few days ago, dumping branches over its sides onto the fields. Years ago, I planted trees along one field where the creek enters the farm to stop bank erosion. As the trees were small, I cared for them, mowed and hoed. It was a forestry program I bought into. The program is still pushed today. Stream bank erosion control through tree planting. It's a very noble thought, but I think it's flawed. On my farm, all stream banks are very straight, and where I walk the creek when near dry, I stand 8 feet or more down with the field's edges. And where the trees grow along the edge, the moving water undercuts the straighter bank, and after a while trees start to lean and topple. In the process, a lot of earth is washed loose and flows away. Did I read somewhere that half of Turtle Lake's capacity is gone because of washed-in silt? I believe it. And some of it is mine. As muddy as the water is coming out of the roaring tubes at the dam, some of my good soil is going down the Blue, the Kansas, the Missouri, into the Mississippi, and all the way down to the Gulf. I must have land there. If nothing else, a swamp. I once heard an old farmer say, if they only would have let us put in dams where we needed them on the ranch, on farms, we would have controlled flooding by holding the water where we needed it. I believe it. When half the farm road washed away last fall after the heavy rain, it rekindled my idea of a big farm pond in front of one of the watersheds coming down my farm. When I laid my plan in front of some technical people, they told me, no way, I would catch too much water. I was looking at the big pond idea, also for the dam, to give me access to the hayfields in the back again. I could drive across the dam to get there. Today, I cannot cross the creek there anymore, as the creek runs deeper now than it did years ago. The county engineer has called for a meeting about the back road, giving me access and the bridge there. When we grew wheat, we prayed whenever a loaded truck had to cross. They did place an extra beam under the bridge. If a floating tree would block that bridge, and there would be another cloudburst, that bridge would wash, and I would collect good bridge timbers. That is, if they washed onto the land, or else they would go onto Turtle Lake. They would make rough surfboards with splinters, but good lumber, though. I might finish up building my big dam yet, so I can get to the acreage to the back of the farm. In time, there would be good fishing. The problem at hand is cleaning the low fields, getting the baled hay off before there is another rainy period. By the way, as I walked the edges of the fields, a good-sized buck jumped up. He already had his antlers and showed it proudly as he was watching me. It's still all velvety. A few more months and he will find his places to scrape. By then, the hay will be off, and so will the cows. Summer heat will be over. There will be autumn in the air. Another growing season with all its challenges will have passed. Farming, it's a way of life.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. With that, this Wednesday edition comes to a close. We appreciate you tuning in, and please rejoin us right here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.